Selection is a programming tool we have that allows our program to turn from a series of linear instructions to an interactive piece of software that can change based on user decisions or variable values. Another term for selection is an if statement, since most modern high-level programming languages use the identifier if to denote a selection. Let's look at a few scenarios that may warrant a selection using the greatest game in the world again. Here, let's say we have a skill issue and our health reaches 0. We may have a bit of code that looks like this. Note that this is not C# code. This is pseudocode, a way of writing code that doesn't match any real code. This is just used to help plan out our program. This may not be the actual code the game uses, but we can imagine there is something similar to: if the player HP variable reaches 0 or less, then trigger the death animation and reload to a previous checkpoint. Let's say we need some sort of event to trigger the opening of this door. We may have an if statement that looks like this. If the player is holding door key boolean variable is equal to true, then play the door opening animation, else, which means otherwise, give the player a message to keep the door closed. Even a simple program like a thermostat may have a selection statement checking the value of the user temperature versus the detected temperature of the room. You may notice some green text in this code. If you use a double // you can write a comment in your code. This does not affect the code in any way, it is just an easy way to explain sections of your code to other programmers who may be reading it. In this example, we have asked the user to enter a number, store it in a variable called int_user_input, and then use a selection statement to check if the user input is equal to true. If so, it will output the message, "You have written the number 1" to the console. In C# we use an if and then some brackets. Inside the brackets we create what's called a condition. This condition will either be true or false. If the condition evaluates to true, then the code inside these curly brackets will run. If the condition is false, then the code will not run. Any code after the curly brackets will run as normal. Notice that inside the condition, when you are comparing the two values, we use a double equal symbol. Again, this is one of those rules that is easy to forget, but just remember, assignment is 1, comparison is 2. This first example shows what happens when we run the program and the condition is met. We can see that the code inside the curly bracket runs, and we get an output message to the console, and this second message is outside of the curly brackets. This second example, the condition is not met, and the code inside the curly brackets is not run, meaning we do not get the output inside the curly brackets, but we still get the output outside the curly brackets. I recommend pausing the video now and experimenting with this code. There is a link in the description that will show you how to set up Visual Studio if you don't know how. Let's make this a little more complex. If the condition evaluates to false, then instead of nothing happening, we can use an else statement to run an alternative set of code. The code that will be run is inside the curly brackets after the else statement. Here you can see me running two codes with two different outcomes. Input 1 and the condition is true. Input 2 and the condition is false. So, to reiterate, if this condition evaluates to true, the code inside the first curly brackets will be run. If the condition evaluates to false, the code inside the curly brackets after the else will be run. Again, this is a good time to pause and try this yourself. But what if we want more than two outcomes to a condition? For example, if a program wants 3 or 4 different options based on user input. This is where the else if comes into play. Here we see the original selection statement followed by 2 or more else if commands with slightly different conditions running different code based on the user input. It is important to know that we can do the same thing with a switch case statement where the user input in the brackets will be checked against various cases. Let's run the code and try out a few different outcomes. Input 4, and it will output "You have written a number 4. Input 2, and it will output "You have written a number 2. Input 3, and it will output "You have written a number 3. And any number not 1, 2, 3, or 4, it will output the else statement. Once again, pause and try this out. Conditions are not limited to simple equal comparisons. We can use several relational operators to compare, including greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, or even not equal to. The exclamation mark in C# denoting a not operator. Let's show you an example. In this example, the code inside the curly brackets will not run unless the variable user input is greater than or equal to 0. When running this code, you can see what happens if I put a positive and a negative number. Let's look at a final example of an if statement using an equal operator. Here we can see we have used the condition to check if the user input is equal to a specific string. This can be very useful when making sure the user inputs what you want them to. We'll look at how you can get them to repeat an input in a later video. When running, you can see if I input the string inside the condition, the output of the if statement runs. If I do not input the string inside the condition, the output of the else statement runs instead. Finally, we'll take a look at nesting. Nesting is the concept of placing one statement inside of another. You may want to purposefully do this, or beginner programs may nest a selection statement inside of an existing one by mistake. We'll look at both examples. In this example, we only want to run the code that outputs access granted if both the username and the password variables contains the value admin and password respectively. To achieve this, we nest the second selection statement containing the condition if password equals password inside the first selection statement. That means if the username is equal to admin, it will then check if the password is password and then write access granted to the console. Now there is a more elegant way of doing this using Boolean operators, but we will save that for another video. Let's look at another example. In this example, I've created a program to quiz users on general knowledge questions. I've created 2 questions. However, after some testing, I noticed that the program does not ask the second question if the user does not get the first question correct. If I answer the first question correctly by matching the condition, you can see it asks the second question as intended. If I ask the second question incorrectly, however, it does not ask the second question. Instead, it ends the program prematurely. I have made a logic error. The program works, but it does not do what I intended it to do. See if you can pause and spot the mistake I have made. If you spotted that the second if statement was nested inside the first if statement due to a misplace of this bracket, then well done. What happened is that I started programming the second question inside the curly brackets of the first if statement, accidentally nesting it inside. A common mistake that you should always be on the lookout for. Let's fix this by moving the closing bracket of the first if statement to the correct place. Once again, this may feel like a lot to remember, but with programming, practice is everything. Try the on-screen challenges. If you can do all 4 of them without help, then let me know in the comments. If you have any questions, also let me know in the comments. If you would like to see step-by-step answers to these challenges, there will be a follow-on video which I will pin in the comments. If you learned something new from this video, or enjoyed it otherwise, please give this video a like and tap that subscribe button for more coding videos.